There is a kind of loneliness that doesn't announce itself dramatically. It doesn't arrive with abandonment or silence. It doesn't show up when you are left behind or forgotten. In fact, it often appears in the exact opposite conditions. It emerges when you are surrounded. When your calendar is full, your phone keeps lighting up, and your social life, from the outside, looks functional, perhaps even successful. You are present. You participate. You listen, respond, laugh when expected. Nothing is visibly wrong. And yet, beneath that surface of normality, there is a quiet and persistent sensation that something essential is not being met. A feeling difficult to explain without sounding ungrateful. A sense of distance that doesn't come from others leaving, but from something within you withdrawing. Many people carry this feeling for years without naming it. They assume it is fatigue, stress, or mood. They tell themselves it will pass. But late at night, when the noise of the day fades and the performance of being fine no longer has an audience, the same question returns with unsettling clarity. Why do I feel lonely even with friends? This question is not a sign of weakness. It is not evidence that something is wrong with you. Quite the opposite. It is often the moment when a person becomes conscious of a deeper layer of their inner life. As uncomfortable as it may be, it deserves to be treated seriously. What most people call loneliness is usually understood as the absence of others. But this modern form of loneliness is different. It is the absence of resonance. You can be physically close to people and still feel existentially untouched. Conversations happen, but they skim the surface. You exchange words, but not meaning. You share time, but not inner space. The discomfort does not come from isolation, but from dissonance. From the growing realization that the things you carry internally, your doubts, your questions, your reflections on time, purpose, and identity, do not easily fit into the environments you inhabit socially. And so, gradually, you begin to edit yourself. You learn which parts of you are welcomed and which create friction. Certain thoughts are softened, certain silence is filled, certain questions left unasked. Not because you are dishonest, but because you are adaptive. Humans are deeply social beings, and adaptation is how we survive. But adaptation has a cost. Over time, the most honest parts of the self are quietly pushed aside, not rejected outright, but postponed indefinitely. This is where loneliness begins, not when others disappear, but when you do. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this condition with uncomfortable precision. He wrote extensively about what it means to live among others while remaining fundamentally alone. For Nietzsche, the crowd was not a solution to existential isolation. It was often the mechanism by which depth was avoided. He observed that most social structures exist to protect people from confronting the more difficult questions of existence. Questions about meaning, suffering, mortality, and responsibility. To belong, one must often simplify. To be accepted, one must not look too closely at what others prefer to ignore. Nietzsche did not see this as a moral failure, but as a psychological pattern. Depth isolates not because it rejects others, but because it exposes the limits of shared understanding. When a person begins to feel lonely in the presence of friends, it is often because their inner life has outgrown the language available to them. The conversations remain the same, but the internal terrain has changed. What once felt sufficient now feels thin. Not wrong, just incomplete. Albert Camus approached this same tension from a different angle. He called it the absurd, the conflict between the human need for meaning and a world that offers no clear answers. We want coherence, direction, and purpose. The world responds with randomness, routine, and noise. Social life, for many, becomes a way to manage this discomfort. Distraction replaces reflection. Activity replaces presence. But the absurd does not disappear simply because it is ignored. It waits. And for those who are sensitive to it, it eventually makes itself felt as a quiet dissatisfaction that no amount of company seems to resolve. This is why loneliness can persist even in connection. Because the issue is not the number of people in your life, but the level of truth you are allowed to bring into the room. Intimacy, real intimacy, requires risk. It requires the willingness to reveal thoughts that are unfinished, feelings that are ambiguous, questions that have no immediate answers. And not every environment is built to hold that. When those conditions are absent, the soul contracts, not in pain, but in fatigue. It is important to understand that this experience is not a failure of social skill or emotional health. It is often a sign of awareness, a signal that something within you is no longer satisfied by surfaces alone, that you are beginning to notice the difference between being occupied and being understood. This is why it is essential to say this clearly, without hesitation. You are not broken. You are just awake. Awakening does not always feel liberating. More often, it feels disorienting. It creates distance where there was once comfort. It introduces questions where there was once certainty. And it makes certain forms of companionship feel insufficient. Not because they are bad, but because they are no longer enough. Neither Nietzsche nor Camus offered easy solutions to this condition. They did not promise relief. What they offered instead was permission. Permission to stop treating this feeling as something to be fixed. Permission to stop apologizing for depth. Permission to accept that some forms of loneliness are not wounds, but thresholds. The task, then, is not to eliminate the void, but to relate to it differently. To stop running from it. To stop labeling it as a defect. To recognize it as a space, uncomfortable, quiet, unresolved, where something honest can emerge. Not all loneliness is a call for company. Some of it is a call for alignment. For a life that reflects the seriousness of your inner questions. For relationships that can tolerate silence. For conversations that do not rush toward reassurance. If you feel lonely even with friends, it does not mean you are failing at connection. It may mean you are ready for a deeper form of it, one that begins not with others, but with your willingness to remain present with yourself. This void you feel is not empty. It is spacious. And in that space, something essential is waiting, not to be filled, but to be understood.